Anna joining us on the Book Talk segment of the show today. Great to welcome a man who has written a very fascinating book. We all watch the news in some form or another, and he has written a book called Weighing Anchors. Brian Williams, Diane Sawyer, Scott Pelley, Katie Couric, Anderson Cooper, Wolf Blitzer, about a veteran TV news writer critiques the network's top anchors. We're joined by Mervin Block today from New York City. And Mervin, pleasure to talk to you. How are you today?
Fine, thank you.
Had a chance to read through the book. I've always been kind of a news wonk myself, particularly just from watching the broadcast. Not always just the content, but I like to see the different anchors and what they do, and I've always kind of enjoyed that, particularly growing up in New York, where you're right in the middle of it all. And I like what you write in the book. I agree with you. I think the writing has slipped a bit over the years, hasn't it?
Seems so, or I wouldn't have a book.
You wouldn't have your column either, right? Just to give a quick background for the folks maybe not aware. I mean, you wrote, you were a news writer for, is it CBS for the most of your career, Mervin?
Well, for some of it anyway. For a good deal of time, I spent at CBS and ABC and NBC.
So you were at all three, the big three. You saw,
yes,
you saw
that's
it
right.
all. Right. Any differences from working at the three networks, between the networks, as far as style and maybe content? I know a lot of people think, certain networks have a certain point of view. I don't think it was as much prevalent maybe back in the 60s or 70s or maybe even early 80s as maybe it is now. Would you agree with that? Or?
Well, one difference that I recall was that the NBC newsroom was carpeted.
Well, that makes it more comfortable.
Yes, that's right.
How about editorially?
Well, I was never aware of any point of view writing. I mean, no one would. I can't imagine that any one of my bosses, and almost everyone was my boss. I can't imagine that any boss would tell a writer, we want this point of view up high or inserted or whatever. Mm-hmm. We just wrote what at least I can. The only person I can speak for is myself.
Right.
I was never aware of anything like that going on.
Yeah, I think back then, and where the three networks were the only game in town before cable came along, I think it was pretty fair for the most part. Newscasts were. I think now all the cable channels and all that, I think you just hear more about it now. Maybe there is more of a point of view now than before, but I just wondered if you had noticed it back then while you were working. So you say it was not the case.
I would have been sensitive to that sort of thing, and I would probably have rebelled. No, I'm unaware of any such approach.
Well, let's talk about the book, Mervin. I know you have written a column over the years. This is a collection of your essays, isn't it, about your commentary on the different anchors and maybe criticisms of how the news is presented. First of all, how did you start doing the column?
I try to listen to the evening news when I'm around, and I had heard a string of mistakes in broadcast copy, and so I started. I took a clipboard to my easy chair, and I'd write whatever I had heard if I heard something that was suspect, and but I never wrote anything on the strength of what I had heard. I wanted to check the transcript to make sure that what I thought I heard was indeed in the transcript.
Right.
So I began getting these transcripts and to double check, and I couldn't believe what some of the mistakes I heard. I mean, when I say I couldn't believe, I don't mean I couldn't believe the stories. I mean, I couldn't believe the kinds of mistakes that were being made and that were not intercepted by a copy editor or by the anchor himself. Mm-hmm. I mean, two of the evening news anchors are also managing editors.
Right.
Scott Pelley and Brian Williams are the managing editors of their programs. And Diane Sawyer is while she might not have a formal title, whatever an anchor delivers on air is something that he accepts or approves, or else he would kick it back to the writer and say, this is wrong, you need to rewrite this.
You just kind of, from reading your book, Mervin, you get the impression that a lot of times the managing editor, whether they read it through or not, I'm sure they read it ahead of time just to make sure they got the words and all that, but
yes.
But juxtapositions of verbs and noun, basic grammar that can really change the meaning of a story. You point out a lot of those examples, which is kind of hard to believe at that level of news writing that can happen.
Yes. I mean, I myself make mistakes, but I'm not paid millions of dollars a year.
That's right. Well, what it kind of is, I guess the process may be different now than maybe when you were in. I'm not sure. Correspondents out in the field, feed the stories in. Basically, all the anchor has to do now is, write intros for the most part. There's not as many head-on stories where the anchor reads it all the way through anymore. So there's a lot less writing to be done. You would think they'd get it right more often.
Well, I don't know whether the anchors even write intros. Maybe some of them do, some of the time, but all of the evening newscasts have staff writers, and they do some of the writing, but the anchor is responsible for every word uttered on his newscast. And so he should take special care to make sure that what he says is factually and grammatically correct.
And when you look at a script...
Obviously...
if you look at a script for a newscast, it's basically about 20 to 22 minutes in length, and like you say, most of it is the reporting from the field, so the actual number of words that the anchor might actually say maybe is a page and a half, maybe 2 pages, right? So it's not a lot.
Well, the anchors speak for 6 to 7 minutes.
Right.
In what's a 22-minute newscast, 22 minutes after deducting time for commercials. And one anchor I write about, David Muir of ABC News, who was sitting in for Diane Sawyer whenever she was off, and he may still sit in for her. In one newscast, he used the word tonight 27 times.
Yeah.
And correspondents on that same newscast used the word tonight 5 times, and an announcer used it once. So that meant there were 33 tonights in a 22-minute newscast. And anchors like to use the word tonight as though that makes the news fresher.
Right.
Even though sometimes they'll say, and sometimes I should shift that to often, they'll say that something happened tonight, whereas in fact it happened 12 hours earlier.
Yeah, particularly if it happened in Europe or the Middle East. It could be 12, 18 hours old before it shows up in the next night's newscast. So I like that when you wrote about that. How about the term which drives me nuts? Every station now does this, breaking news, and half of it isn't even worth news at all, and it's not breaking. I know that was never really a big deal back in the 70s and 80s, even 90s, but now breaking news, that's all you see.
Yes, and something else, developing news.
Yep.
And this just in.
Right.
And happening now.
Yep.
That's another one. That's a CNN favorite.
Yeah, they like that one.
Happening now. And in one piece that I wrote about Wolf Blitzer, I called that CNN, Blitzer cries wolf. And he had happening now and breaking news and exclusive.
Yeah, exclusive is another one. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Every interview is an exclusive when you turn the channel and you see the same guy on another channel being interviewed. It's not exclusive.
Yes. Well, all it means to me is that the reporter or correspondent, as the networks call their reporters, the reporter conducted the interview after another network had already interviewed him, or before the next interview was scheduled, something like that. That's what.
Yeah, you're the only one talking to him at that time. Yeah, that's that.
Yes,
really
that's
means.
right. No one else was present. No other reporter was present. And it's pure hype. The top newspapers in the country, one of them is the New York Times, another is the Wall Street Journal, and there are a few others, I think maybe the Washington Post and the LA Times. They never use the word exclusive.
No.
The Times and the Wall Street Journal break some of the biggest stories of the day, and they never call a story exclusive.
To me, if everything's breaking news, then nothing is breaking news. It's so watered down, it doesn't mean anything. But that's just my personal peeve.
It's just hype.
Yeah.
And now, another term that CBS has been exploiting is, original reporting.
Right.
Original reporting. Well, what is original reporting? Reporters go out and dig up some information and blah, 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 you know.
They didn't steal it from somebody else. That's what it means, I guess.
And in many cases, if they did steal it, it would be only petty larceny.
Right. We'll just, we don't have a lot of time today, Mervin. Let's give the audience listening maybe an example or two. You mentioned already Wolf Blitzer, Scott Pelley, who most recently, I guess the most recent anchor to have the one of the 3 nightly chairs. How would you rate him as the anchor, taking over from Katie Couric?
Seems to be good. That doesn't mean he's flawless, but he strikes me as good, and he's been he's been anchoring for only about a year and a half, something like that.
Right. I always thought he was a solid journalist when he does obviously the 60 Minutes and did the field reporting for so long, and you get the impression. I mean, he's fair. I think he's fair from what I've seen. I don't get the impression he has a point of view that he's trying to put across. So I think he kind of fits into that traditional CBS mold that, of course, goes back to Edward R. Murrow and then Cronkite after that.
Yes, I agree with you on that.
Brian Williams, I guess, is the dean of anchors right now, and I know you had a lot of essays in the book about him. Any particular thoughts about Brian Williams?
Well, I really should send him a thank you note for providing me so much material.
That's why I asked. I figured you had something to say about him.
Well, one episode that comes to mind is he was anchoring on the day of an attack in Iraq, an attack on Americans, and he said that it had occurred at sunset. He didn't say where that sunset was, in Iraq or in Manhattan. Ordinarily, anchors give the time of where they're in the place they're broadcasting.
Right.
They talk about the. Well, he said sundown. The next night, he anchored again, and he said the attack that he talked about the first night. He said the attack occurred overnight. This is what he said on the second night. The attack occurred overnight. Well, as a matter of fact, Reuters had moved a story the previous day at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and they said that the attack took place at 10 a.m. that day. So on the second night, the attack had taken place 32 hours earlier than on the second night when he said it occurred overnight. So I called that section The Overnight Life of Brian.
Yeah, I like some of the titles you have for the different chapters, and I agree with you. I think they want to keep a story going. I guess they figure it has legs, but they try and the time of it tends to get a little muddled every time they tell it.
Yes, and the book documents deceptions, distortions, delinquencies. I mean, I found the material shocking. I mean, shocking that network anchors made these kinds of mistakes. They weren't intercepted by anyone.
I agree. And you look now, look at all the times where they'll have a live call in or something, and they get either the person is wrong on the air, or they get somebody making a crank call. It seems like the editing process has really fallen by the wayside.
Yes, well, that's one of the big problems as I see it. The networks used to have full-time, dedicated copy editors working on their evening newscasts. And so, for example, I remember on the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite, the editor was Ed Bliss, who had worked with Merle. He had been a writer and producer for Merle, and he was a real stickler. And your copy had to measure up. I mean, you'd hand your copy after you'd written it to Ed Bliss, and he went over it ultra carefully. He really scrutinized the copy. Well, now the networks, at least ABC and NBC at the last I heard, had no full-time copy editor on the evening news, that when a writer finished a script, he handed it to any associate producer who was not busy. Well, associate producers don't care to read copy. They want to produce. So that's a problem. Eliminating copy editors saves money, but it doesn't save copy.
No, it brings down the quality of the broadcast.
Yes.
Well, the name of the book is called Weighing Anchors. A veteran TV news writer critiques the network's top anchors. We've been talking with Mervin Block today. He also wrote the book Writing Broadcast News. I know you also teach a class in news writing. I guess that's for any news station, radio or TV that brings you in, right? You do that right on site, don't you?
Yes. I've never just barged into a station and insisted on holding a news writing workshop.
They have to ask you.
Yeah, I have to get an invitation first.
Well, I know a lot of stations and some down here in our area, Mervin, that could use your help. But this book really gives you a good taste of a little bit behind the scenes of what goes on at the news desks, particularly when it comes to writing. And Mervin, I know the book is recently out, right? But give the folks a place they can get it, either a website or a place they can contact you.
Amazon.com, BNN, which is BarnesandNoble.com. Fine bookstores everywhere have it. So if any bookstore doesn't have it, it's not in my category of fine bookstore.
That's right. How about, do you have a website, Mervin? People will want to contact you maybe for getting a class.
Yes, mervinblock.com.
And that's MERVINBLOCK, just to spell out your name.
Right.
Folks. Mervin, I could talk about this for hours, but hopefully we can have you on again down the road. We do a lot of talk about media on our show down here, and I'm glad you made the book available, and we're able to find you online there to have you on today. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you.